Hello, Star Wars fans. Today I'm going to explain why the prequels, despite their issues, are better Star Wars movies compared to the new Disney Trilogy. This comes at the request of AziaXtremeInphinity in my comments. Right off the bat, I'm going to exclude talking about visuals and sound. Both trilogies succeed at looking and sounding like Star Wars, which leaves the story as the true comparison between the trilogies. If I do talk about visuals in a scene, it's because it pertains to the story, not because it looks bad. Let's start off with the prequel trilogy's problems. It is known to have cheesy dialogue.
I don't like sound.
Poor pacing.
Which started right here with the taxation of trade routes.
Annoying characters. Mostly just one annoying character. However, it still felt like Star Wars, even though it wasn't as good as the original trilogy. And the reason it felt like that was because each scene moved the story along. And to prove it, I'm going to start by examining a couple of scenes that include the most hated character in the prequels, Jar Jar Binks. In this scene, Qui-Gon Jinn, Padme, and Jar Jar enter the city on Tatooine, and Jar Jar steps in poop. A hated scene. However, despite the annoying character, the scene shows the trio entering a foreign city. If it was to be written down, it would go something like this. The trio enters a foreign city. But since the story is shown visually, it could be written down as the trio enters a foreign city and Jar Jar is peering about curiously when he suddenly stepped into a pile of shit. Even if this scene has that extra unneeded bit, the audience still unconsciously understands that the trio enters a foreign city. Next, let's look at a series of scenes where Jar Jar gets his mouth numbed in the energy binders of Anakin's pod racer and then gets his hand stuck. This series of scenes is a mini-story, most likely added to break up the sheer amount of monotonous dialogue in the preceding scenes and to create a brief bit of tension to change up the pace. But as a whole, this set of scenes shows Anakin getting his pod racer ready and preparing to start the vehicle. At its worst, the scene is slightly distracting, but the story never derails and we understand what's happening. Now let's look at a series of scenes near the beginning of The Force Awakens. In this set of scenes, shuttles are departing a Star Destroyer-esque ship. Then it shows stormtroopers arrayed in flickering light, followed by shuttles approaching the ground. If it was to be written out, enemy shuttles are departing a Star Destroyer, followed by stormtroopers are in the shuttle, followed by the shuttles approach their target and prepare to unload. However, the middle scene with the stormtroopers is not moving the story along. We already know that the shuttles are going to have some form of Imperial enemy since they are departing a Star Destroyer. So the longest scene in this series of scenes is unnecessary. Some people could argue that it adds tension, like Jar Jar getting his hand stuck, but does it really? Everything it adds has already been conveyed in the scene beforehand. We already know that there's enemies, and we're going to see exactly who or what it is in the shuttle when it lands. However, since the scene has stormtroopers in it, it looks like Star Wars. And it looks cool. But when the movie is over, a large part of the audience is left scratching their head since they feel something is off. That off feeling is the number of scenes that don't add to the story despite looking and sounding like Star Wars. It's a trick. That off feeling is also due to the inconsistencies in the characters. When crazy stuff happens in the prequels, there is usually a scene earlier in the movie that allows the audience to believe that is possible, like Anakin piloting a starfighter.
Has anybody ever seen a pod race?
They're pod racing on Malastare. Very fast, very dangerous.
I'm the only human who can do it.
You must have Jedi reflexes if you race pods. You don't think Anakin can win?
Don't get me wrong, though. I have a great faith in the boy. Is a credit to your race.
But then there are characters like Rey in Disney Star Wars. She is a scavenger at the beginning of Episode 7, but by the end of Episode 7, She is essentially a master mechanic, a master pilot, Jedi Master, and a master of combat, but we have zero build-up to that. We are missing scenes explaining how she got there. These are called plot holes. So we need scenes explaining that she is a good pilot, scenes explaining why she is a good mechanic, why she can use Force techniques without training, and why she has the skills to defeat a Sith apprentice who spent years being trained by Luke Skywalker and then Snoke. And if characters magically gain skills without trying, how can the audience relate to them? So in Disney Star Wars, there are scenes that add nothing to the story, and scenes that should explain critical parts of the story are entirely missing. Then there are the scenes that don't make sense, as in poor visual storytelling. An example being where Rey fights a Red Guard, and the Red Guard is dual-wielding until the Red Guard suddenly isn't, right when he's about to stab Rey. When he's about to defeat Rey, his weapon magically disappears as he's stabbing her. This obviously detracts from the overall story because characters are winning fights they shouldn't. So to sum up the errors, the prequels had poor pacing, cheesy dialogue, annoying characters, and bad CGI. However, since the characters act appropriately, considering the information that the audience has been provided by earlier scenes, the storylines being told in the trilogy end up complete despite the movie's other flaws. The Disney Trilogy, on the other hand, has poor pacing, annoying characters, and cheesy dialogue just like the prequels, but manages to avoid the bad CGI. However, it tacks on scenes that add nothing to the story, is entirely missing scenes that are critical to character development, has poor use of visual storytelling, and is chock full of unrelatable characters. These prevalent errors are plot holes, and the story being told so far in Disney Star Wars is a mess because of them. And if the story is full of problems, Star Wars fans will never get the epic Star Wars feeling that they crave. And to top it off, the main villains were far better in the prequels. They were cunning, manipulative, and menacing as hell, which makes it satisfying when we see them on screen. And ultimately, the bad guys win in the prequels. Palpatine wins. He converts Anakin Skywalker to the dark side and topples the Old Republic, creates an empire, and destroys the Jedi. It's incredible. The villains in the Disney Trilogy are jokes in comparison. How can you relate to wanting to beat the bad guys when the bad guys act like children? So yeah, add bland villains to the list of Disney's errors. At this point, it is highly apparent that there is nothing that can be done in the upcoming Episode 9 to rectify the plot holes in Disney's trilogy. And if it can't be rectified, then a complete story trumps an incomplete story. That is ultimately why the prequels end up being a superior trilogy compared to what has been offered up in Disney Star Wars. This is one of those topics that I could keep finding more errors to discuss for hours and hours, but everything I mentioned is what I believe to be the main issues in each trilogy. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and maybe peruse through some of my other videos. And thank you, AziaXtremeInphinity, for the topic, and I hope I sufficiently satisfied your request. And everyone who took the time to listen to this entire video, thank you for listening, and have a great day. Bye.